got a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, so we have an apparent serious oxygen leak. 4, 3, 2, 1. Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. I think we need to do a little more all-weather testing.
Welcome to space.
Hello and welcome to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we talk you through all the mistakes, failures, and monsters that made space exploration possible. We are your hosts, Quinn,
Chris.
A mobile Chris.
And we are back with part 2 of our series on OTRAG, the first private launch company, and back with our special guest, Nate
Bethea.
Yes. Do you want me to go back? Was that a correction for me to go back and add, or is that a correction?
Okay. No, it's okay.
I'm keeping it in.
I wasn't sure if you were stumbling on my last name or not. It's
We can stitch the name parts together so it sounds like a voicemail.
So Nate Bethea is the producer and co-host of the Trash Future and What a Hell of a Way to Die podcast, as well as the producer for Lions Led by Donkeys and Kill James Bond.
That's correct. Yes, I'm also technically a co-host of Lions Led by Donkeys now. It's a free floating kind of thing, but yeah, I've kind of stepped in on that one. So
I'm not going back to fix it, but
no, it's fine. It's fine. No, don't worry about it. It's fine. Like I technically am, but many people are not. Many people think I'm just doing a lot of guest spots, but actually I am a co-host. After only 5 years, I finally wormed my way into the co-pilot seat. Exactly.
After calling every other co-host's superior officer and letting them know about the horrible things they've been saying, so they would be intimidated into not continuing on.
And finally, I'm in the co-pilot seat, and I've gotten the fucking intercom system. I've spliced in an iPod. I'm playing the worst music. He can't stop it because he doesn't have the controls in front of him. Like, we're having a great day.
I was going to say something along the lines of like being in the co-pilot seat of the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast sounds like being in the co-pilot seat of like one of those planes we talked about last time.
Yeah.
You know, the kind of thing that's going to like maybe not crash and burn,
it's
but
it's jokes, so it's got to be a tank, but like it's an undersized tank. Like it's way too small for him because he's like 6'3". It's still too small for me. It's got one of those auto loaders that kills you if you're in the way. Like just everything about it.
It's got to be a Sheridan. That thing is an absolute death trap. I've been in one, driven one, absolute nightmare vehicle.
I've never been in one of those, but my only experience with tanks was being in a combined arms unit and being like, yep, it sure is hot and disgusting behind the engine block of an Abrams. It's like, it's like a jet engine. It's disgusting.
The Sheridan, the aluminum monstrosity that you can dent like your refrigerator.
I dented one with a friggin' sledgehammer, and if you get hit by any
Why are you hitting it with a sledgehammer?
Because I could.
I thought that was at a museum.
Do you think anyone likes a Sheridan?
Were you quitting that day?
No, I was a volunteer. They're not paying me.
Oh, okay.
I
was going to say, I was going through on Wikipedia. I'm like, do the Canadians use Sheridans still? Like, what the fuck's that?
The Chris's are both American.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm the only Canadian on the podcast.
I just assumed this was an all Canada podcast.
Don't worry about it. But no, that thing was terrible. Like, if it got hit by any kind of, what's it called, high explosive anti-tank warhead, it'll just poison the crew. The guided missile on it doesn't actually get collected for like a mile. And also, it'll just randomly go off.
But yeah, if we had ever bought them, Canada would still be using them for like the next 50 years.
I do like this sentence, though. The Sheridan saw extensive combat in the Vietnam War where problems with the platform became evident, particularly its poor survivability and reliability. It's just like, all right. That's like jazz where the space between the notes is more important.
We don't know if there are mechanical problems because they never come back for us to check.
And let's just say consumable cartridge cases and burning debris left in the barrel when it's reloaded. Not a combo made in heaven.
Not to continue derailing us, but I'm just imagining you telling some little kid about this at a museum. Like it's that meme of Squidward leaning in and just explaining how this thing is going to fucking kill this kid.
Oh,
like,
no,
kid's
that was
just looking at a cool tank and you're just like, oh yeah, you'd burn in that thing.
No, I had that conversation with the M60. The Sheridan was actually very delightful. I think they're a Russian couple.
Welcome back, everyone, to the World of Tanks podcast.
Yeah, hi. We're talking about armor today. Did you know that? I can't even think. Did you know that an Abrams tank is so goddamn heavy that basically no bridge in the world can accommodate it? Like, seriously, when we do training exercises, they had to put in Korea. They had to slap those things on heavy equipment transports and take them to the training area, because if they tried to drive them, not only would they destroy all the roads, but they'd probably collapse the bridges that weren't on major highways.
And they're only getting heavier.
Yeah, exactly. And like the Korean main battle tank weighs less than a Bradley, and a Bradley weighs slightly more than half of an Abrams. So anyway, tank podcast complete. Let's talk about rockets, the opposite of tanks. Tanks' worst nightmare.
Yeah, so in the last episode, we covered the origins of Lutz Kaiser, how he became a rocket engineer, the insane Nazis who mentored him, and kind of the general situation of the rocket industry in Europe at that time, which is like the 60s, 70s kind of era. So Kaiser's big idea was basically to make launches a lot cheaper and break the cycle of abortive European rocket programs with his Bundelrakete, or bundle rocket, which was basically just slapping a lot of tiny modular rockets together. He said something along the lines of, "My rocket is like Lego." So he started his own company named OTRAG and made a deal with the dictator of Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, to rent almost 10% of the country's landmass and build his own corporate state. So, like with last time, I'll mostly be sourcing from the book Projet Wotan by Joelle Stolz and a report by California Institute of Technology researcher Stanley Cohn, who acquired and translated some of OTRAG's actual contracts.
Shaba North.
Now, where we last left off, Kaiser had just flown down to Zaire and sealed the deal with dictator Mobutu Sese Seko to allow OTRAG to operate out of Shaba province in the southern chunk of the country. So this was an area that had previously been called Katanga, and again, I am no expert in Congolese history. Basically, there was a lot of bad blood between Katanga and the rest of Zaire. The area is also a resource powerhouse. Its mines produce a shitload of copper and something like more than 70% of the world's cobalt, though very little of that wealth actually stays in the region, instead being taken up by foreign companies and being redirected to Kinshasa, which you can understand causes a lot of resentment.
You don't say.
Just 15 years before Kaiser showed up, Katanga attempted to secede from the Congo, and with a substantial amount of aid from a Belgian mining company. Which is always a weird kind of situation because they were overexploited and tried to secede, but then the secession attempt then got co-opted by a weird Belgian mining company that sent them a load of mercenaries.
God.
Yeah. Real no-win situation. Though the secession movement was crushed, a lot of rebels escaped into neighboring Angola, where they'd be a thorn in Mobutu's side for years. So, like, overall, this is a region that is pretty pissed off. All of their natural resources are being exploited and not seeing any of the returns. So you can imagine that they were not thrilled when they found out, on top of all of that, that their province had just been rented to a weird German dude and his crew of ex-Nazis. There weren't really any protests or violence against them, but locals did make it very clear that OTRAG was not welcome.
Starting off strong, and by strong I mean, good God, we're back in it.
That is a fair point, because refusing to let the lackluster welcome get him down, Lutz Kaiser took a look around his new corporate fiefdom for a place to build his launch site. And what he picked was both cool and very stupid. Kapani Tono, I'm probably mispronouncing that, is a massive plateau. It rises more than 1,300 meters out of the jungle, situated right along the Lavua River. And every picture I have seen of this place looks awesome. They are situated right on top of that plateau and just launching rockets, and they're more than a kilometer up.
I see. All right.
So the launch site, which was officially called Shaba North, would be a little like working at a resort. They had a swimming pool, restaurants, bungalows for engineers, gardens, and even their own radio station. They had access to good German food, which they also used to bribe officials and entice locals into working for them. They also made a game out of giving lit cigarettes to chimps living on the plateau, who quickly got addicted.
Wait a second.
Look, I feel as though you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, because like if you get them addicted and then you stop giving them cigarettes, like you've created a problem for yourself.
Not to mention, this is a rocket launch site. Like, it's bad enough that you're smoking, but now monkeys are running around with fire.
Monkey's gonna go stub out a cigarette on one of your rockets.
I wanted to accept the headcanon of like, this is how we got Enos. This is like the origin story.
Dude, the story of Enos would be cooler if he was just working for cigarettes that entire... Like, we have the picture of him where he looks like he's smoking. And they were stolen from, no, it was Cameroon. Chimp derail.
Perfect.
But putting a rocket launch site on top of a massive plateau naturally presents some problems, like how they're going to get people, equipment, or food up there. Don't worry, Kaiser had an idea. Before any German scientists set foot in Zaire, OTRAG had a 400-man team of Congolese workers working day and night to carve a 2-kilometer-long runway out of the jungle, which is almost as long as what you'd find at an international airport. It wouldn't have been able to handle a 747, but it was big enough for Kaiser's Learjet, and Mobutu could fly in anytime he wanted. So the basic idea is that eventually, once this thing was fully set up, any visiting dictator could just fly right up to the launch site. It was also Kaiser's answer to the supply problem. He planned to airlift everything OTRAG would need to the plateau, and because he was a cheap bastard, he planned to do it with a pair of ancient Argosy transport airplanes that the Royal Air Force was getting rid of. So he gets them basically for free. They are decades old, and to convince pilots to fly the thing, he created his own fake airline, which he called OTRAS, or the OTRAG Range Air Service. Through its he just creates a fake airline. It has one customer, 4 employees. None of them know how to service these aircraft.
His fake airline is just his company, but with an evil mustache on it. They
changed
the disguise.
One letter.
Yeah, they changed the letter.
I just looked up that plane, and it is ugly as sin.
Yeah, he got these after the RAF was no longer felt safe flying them, which is going to be an OTRAG thing. Now, work got started at Capanitono, and by mid-1977, OTRAG was ready to start testing their rockets. At the launch pad, crews of Germans and locals worked together in the distinctive OTRAG uniform, yellow jumpsuit and blue hard hat. So I think we talked about this before the recording a bit, but basically, originally, crews just worked in whatever. There's pictures of them working in nothing but jean short shorts because, you're in the sun. That's just what you do. It turns out Kaiser's girlfriend, Susie, thought that was very unprofessional and that they should have a better fit. And so she's the one who insisted on the henchman fit of everybody working all day in the sun in these neoprene jumpsuits.
So they're swimming by the time they're 2 hours into their shift. Nice.
Oh yeah. It seals in the moisture.
I just feel like it's the jungle. I really wouldn't want to deal with this. I mean, I'm sure you got paid really well, or if you were not a foreign worker, you got paid nothing, but it just feels already kind of setting itself out where this looks cool in a photo, and then the minute you put it on, you're like, this really sucks.
Yeah.
And it's by the way, you're going to go build rockets in the equatorial jungle. Enjoy.
It does have to be said, though, that the plateau was actually recommended by Mobutu, and one of the good things about it was that he thought it would be better for the European workers. It was so high up that there weren't really any mosquitoes, and that the climate was a little bit colder than being right down at the ground.
Gotcha. Okay.
Still not good, though.
It's also closer to space, so there we go.
Yeah. So the first 2 tests actually go pretty well, climbing more than 12 kilometers before breaking apart. I should also be clear here, they are not testing the massive bundles of rockets. Each of these test rockets has at most 4 of those kind of stacks put together.
Okay.
Still, it's a big achievement for the company and for Mobutu, who calls into OTRAG's radio station regularly to give the workers a pep talk. And this is also where Mobutu comes up with a nickname for Kaiser that he makes sure everybody in Shaba province uses: the white friend who puts the fire in the sky.
Okay. All right.
I'm imagining what those phone conferences must be like. It's just all right, boys, gather around. I got Mobutu on speaker.
This is more like you're tuning into Radio 108 and you hear Sese Seiko telling you to call him.
Oh, imagine being one of those local workers. You're just listening to the radio and then you hear the dictator of your country calling in to just hey man, hope you're working hard.
And you're sort of I assume I'm going to die in about 10 minutes.
Now, all of this did not go unnoticed by the world's governments, especially Zaire's neighbors, who were not thrilled at the idea of a bunch of ex-Nazis setting up a missile base so close to their borders. Remember that last time we talked about how Kaiser's rockets would be dumping rocket stages over the border into Tanzania? Overall, the criticism of OTRAG fell into 2 categories. First, the claim that OTRAG was planning to build or sell weapons, and the second, the accusations of colonialism when a European company can just rent a huge chunk of Africa.
And not just that, it's everything in that area.
This is the place that produces 70% of the world's cobalt. To give some context, at its peak, OTRAG had about 40 German employees working at Capanitono, and they had over 100,000 people under their corporate fiefdom. Now, while Zaire was one of the few vaguely Western-aligned countries in the region, most of its neighbors like Angola and Tanzania were pretty solidly in the Soviet sphere. And again, this is a pretty big simplification. I am not an expert. it definitely wasn't a kind of two sides issue. In Angola, for example, like the Soviets would back a coup against the Cuban-backed government, and there were similar fights happening between French and US-backed groups in those countries aligned with them. So as soon as OTRAG started setting up shop in Shaba province, Angolan diplomats accused the West of using the company as a ruse to turn Shaba into a military base from which they could take over Zaire's socialist neighbors. Quote, "The real meaning of such a move between Zaire and West Germany is obvious. The establishment of such a facility gives the Western powers a jumping-off place for the encirclement of progressive countries and movements in all of Africa, and Zaire is located in just the right spot to make such a strategy feasible." OTRAG also had to fight off negative press from Western nations, where a lot of people suspected that the company's real motive was to help West Germany secretly rearm itself with illegal weapons. So last time we talked a little bit about how after World War II, Germany, East and West, were barred from developing long-range missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, that kind of stuff. An American journalist around this time named Tad Julk, I'm probably mispronouncing that, he did some, I don't know if it's deep digging, he claims to have a source. Quote, "The work going on today in Zaire is obviously designed to equip West Germany with the most sophisticated delivery systems for missiles with conventional or nuclear warheads." Now, to be clear, that's not going on. Like Tad Julk is, I'd view as kind of like a Seymour Hersh figure, where like he's the guy who broke the Bay of Pigs story, and then later in his life kind of went a little bit insane.
He had a shining light, and then it quickly turned into some kind of psychosis.
He turned into the guy that had the sources and read the white papers.
Oh. The globalists are putting missiles in Zaire. But of all of the countries and people complaining about OTRAG, none complained louder than the Soviet Union and Leonid Brezhnev. Now, they've complained about all the same things as everybody else, but they also pointed out that Shaba province was rich in uranium and that OTRAG was a perfect front for a West German nuclear program. When Brezhnev visited Angolan President Agostinho Neto, who he later tried to have killed, he condemned the West for building, in his words, military strongholds such as the missile testing facility in Zaire to strengthen the last bastions of racism and colonialism. Also, a point to mention, Agostinho Neto died 2 years later during a botched surgery in Moscow.
Hate it when that happens.
Tragic.
A botched surgery or a botched surgery?
I think the people that would know that are probably many feet underground at this time.
Now, while Zaire's neighbors had very good reason to worry about OTRAG's new launch site, especially Tanzania since they were, in the firing line, the Soviets had a more secret reason to oppose OTRAG: Chinese spy satellites. Remember that OTRAG had made it clear that they would work for anyone but South Africa, and China was in the market to buy. So, at this time, China had a space program of their own, but it was still relatively new, and the Soviets were worried that China would use OTRAG to launch a spy satellite sort of off the books. According to OTRAG employees, the Soviets even kept tab on the launch site by having reconnaissance jets buzz Kapani Tono repeatedly. This later gets to a point where the Soviets launch a pair of spy satellites, Cosmos 922 and 953, into orbits that are basically good only for spying on OTRAG. While Western governments didn't necessarily oppose OTRAG, mostly because Zaire was one of the few Western-aligned countries in Africa at the time, the Soviets did create a lot of headaches for the West German government. The Chancellor of West Germany, Helmut Kohl, especially hated Kaiser. When he was asked about the engineer by a journalist, he simply said, quote, "I could break his neck."
Kudos.
Didn't say anything else. The question was like, hey, what are your opinions on OTRAG? No, I'll fucking murder him.
That sounds like a response that I would give.
Yeah, and looking at Lutz Kaiser, I think I could take him. He seems soft. I seem soft too.
He seems like he'd run out of stamina real fast.
Oh, but the jumpsuit makes him slippery. And that was not the only bad publicity OTRAG got, because while they had enjoyed a lot of positive coverage from media and public interest early on, in the late 70s, that started to change very quickly. See, this is the period where the general public starts to become aware a lot more of events like the Holocaust and Operation Paperclip, in part because media and movies start to cover it a lot more directly around this time. A very famous example of this is actually Meryl Streep's breakout role on an NBC docudrama called Holocaust. While the show was criticized by Holocaust survivors and historians for trivializing some events, it still generated a massive amount of public interest, especially in West Germany. When the series was first shown on German TV, every episode was followed by a sort of Talking Dead-like call-in show where a panel of historians would just answer people's questions about the Holocaust because people just wanted to know more. They wanted to, they had not heard about all of these elements before. At the same time, you have novels and movies like The Boys from Brazil coming out that depict Nazi scientists escaping the fall of the Third Reich to finish carrying out their experiments elsewhere. Long story short, the idea of a bunch of ex-Nazis running a rocket program from a plateau base in the middle of Africa went from sci-fi cool to like supervillain shit very quickly, and OTRAG found itself suddenly facing a PR disaster.
As they should be.
Yeah. Now, Kacer, being Kacer, responded to the criticism head on. He said that all the ex-Nazis his company hired did not make OTRAG a wholly Nazi-aligned company. He just had a bunch of them.
No, the Nazis are Nazis. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, listen, I'm just a collector of things, okay?
Yeah, so on top of like saying that OTRAG wasn't a Nazi company just because he'd hired all those Nazis, he then declared that he didn't care about any of the criticisms anyway because he was the Raketen-Kaiser, or Rocket Emperor, another in the long list of dumb nicknames he gave himself.
Doesn't help that Mobutu kind of propped all of that up too.
Yeah, and this is one that he fully comes up with himself. This is who he wants, and it sticks. He uses this for the rest of his life. He also said it was impossible for him to do colonialism because there were only 50 Germans in Zaire. How could we possibly have an outsized influence?
The Battle of Kolwezi and the OTRAG Army.
Now, being signed over to a weird German guy and his crew of ex-Nazis were not the only big events going on in Shaba province in the late 70s. After the end of the Congo crisis, about 15 years earlier, a lot of Katangi's rebels escaped over the border into Angola and formed the FLNC, or Congolese National Liberation Front. And while the FLNC got a lot of support from communist countries like East Germany, Cuba, and the Soviets, they weren't super communist themselves or even all that focused on Katangi's independence anymore. Instead, more just being like an anti-Mobutu front. Anyway, in both 1977 and 1978, the FNLC launched full-out invasions of Shaba province, trying to take over the strategic mining city of Kolwezi. I'm probably mispronouncing that. These became known as Shaba 1 and 2, or collectively as the Shaba Wars. Now, in 1977, the rebels fail and are pushed back into Angola by a coalition of Western-aligned forces, mostly Morocco, Egypt, and France working together.
The French just sticking their nose into everything. Great.
Kind of. It's like, I think it's the Sahara Club that intervenes. The way it works is the French Air Force airlifts something like 1,500 Moroccan soldiers, while the Egyptian Air Force provides airstrikes. And this is enough to push the FNLC back. But when they retry a year later in Shaba 2, they get a lot further and blitz their way into Kolwezi. Like last time, Mobutu calls for foreign aid, and it actually sparks this really weird inter-service incident where the Belgian paratroopers and the French Foreign Legion race each other to be the first to intervene and retake Kolwezi. Like, they are not cooperating. They are coming from opposite directions, and like it's like the World War II racing to reach Berlin kind of thing.
Oh, we're on some shit right now. Okay.
Yeah. Now, back at Kapani Tono, this whole incident had OTRAG spooked. Even though Kolwezi was over 100 miles away and the FLNC is eventually pushed out, it takes 4 days of fighting, during which time the rebels execute a number of Europeans and city locals alike. Also, Kacer being Kacer, he becomes convinced that the rebels' main goal is actually to take over his rocket site. And from that, he decides he needs an army.
Okay. I mean, I was going to say, like, I remember hearing about this stuff in Afghanistan where, like, a footnote to something in, like, the run up to the Soviet invasion, we're like, oh, yeah, there was an insurrection in Gardez, 500 Soviet advisors and their families killed. And it's like, same thing here. You're like, you know, I feel as though it must be difficult to recruit from, like, the bottom 10% of German engineering school graduating classes for your rocket project in the Congo, when it's like, there is at least some headlines about, like, you are going to die.
And you're going to die bad.
Yeah, like particularly not storied graduate of X technical university, you know, massacred in Katanga province, working on what basically looks like a really, really bad sci-fi prop from a 1950s movie, but it's going to launch rockets into space somehow. Like, it doesn't seem as though it's going to have an appeal. You can try to sell it as this exotic experience, but I don't know.
Would you like to build rockets and be Nazi adjacent? Boy, do we have the opportunity for you.
And it's fully the situation where, like, Kacer hears about a thing going on something like 400 miles away and is just like, it's about me personally, and I need an army immediately.
Because nothing bad has ever happened with when corporate death squads are involved.
I would say, like, I know it was the 70s, but I imagine it was probably still difficult to get cocaine into Mobutu's Zaire. So although this sounds like an extremely Al Pacino and Scarface kind of reaction, maybe he was just that paranoid without like nuclear grade stimulants.
In the research, there's definitely mentions of him being into drugs, but it does seem like just at the best of times, he was a paranoid egomaniac, because this becomes a thing. He is convinced that everything that happens is about screwing him personally.
I'm kind of like imagining a sort of John DeLorean situation where it's like he's caught in the Dar es Salaam airport with suitcases full of cocaine or something like that. And he's like, no, it is very important for my rocket research.
Yeah, it's certainly a type of rocket fuel there,
but,
Mr.
But also,
Kaser.
like, it being German, he might eschew cocaine as being too fucking proletarian. He's like, no, I only have this pallet of Nazi pilot speed pills that I've managed to keep my hands on.
Some, as you said, some nuclear grade speed. The stuff will keep you up for 8 days straight.
Yeah, exactly. He's like,
he's exclusively downing like 30 years expired Pervitin.
And he's like, on a long enough timeline, my rocket will bomb Coventry a second time. I will fucking get my chance.
You know, he had a little diorama just staring at it as he's going to sleep just one day.
He'll want to bomb Surrey later. We'll get there.
Well, listen, we can bargain.
This is a funny aside, but we were talking about a terrible startup that says it was going to do a vertical takeoff and landing, like automated, like some kind of air UAV. I'm maybe using the wrong term here. Basically, it was going to do like some kind of electric helicopter taxi service, which obviously would never fly. It was supposed to be automated, like pilotless, and it was still going to be like Uber for helicopters without pilots. But they were like, oh yeah, we have this startup in Coventry, and it's like, all they've done is basically built like a fake airport terminal, but no actual aircraft. And like, yeah, we're making progress. And we were talking about this on TF, and Milo raised the point. It's like, it seems odd to build, your disaster in waiting in Coventry, a city with a checkered history with, with aviation in general. And it's like, yeah. But you know what? If he wants to bomb Surrey, I can't really blame him. It's where my landlord lives. I've been to Surrey. Not a great place.
History's a circle, Coventry. Sorry, but you might see it again.
So yeah, like Kaser, he wants to build up an army, and to his credit, he wasn't dumb enough to think that he could actually build a real fighting force. He just needed a militia that could protect the launch site long enough for help to arrive from like a nearby city. So the OTRAG army was made up of 4 French and South African mercenaries and about 30 local kids, with an armory of 2 AKs, 2 hunting rifles, and a revolver between all of them.
I was going to say this is some Jerk Vanderklerk shit, but I think he would have probably come with a bigger set of munitions than that.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do the voice because I can't really do accents in general, but I really can't do South African accents. But
it is also
I'll sound like worse than Val Kilmer in what was the movie? The Saint. I'll take you to my home in Africa. Like, it's just fucking terrible.
It really is a scuffed accent.
It's a challenge. I mean, you either can do it or you can't. And if you can do it, chances are good that you have really spicy opinions about integration in general.
Yeah, and these guys aren't like, it'll become a thing. These guys aren't the top tier of mercenaries. Like the French guys wash out of the French Foreign Legion from the Battle of Kolwezi, and they just hang around, and OTRAG picks them up.
Oh, some dropouts. Nice. We're really building that good force.
OTRAG actively just follows every world event and just picks up the leftovers.
It must be convenient to have, some mercenaries on standby if you ignore the whole, like, we're, probably not particularly elite operators in a military organization, but they just deserted and hung out in the DRC or in Zaire. It's like, but if I can imagine him recruiting them from various bars and clubs around the Katanga area, and it's like,
it probably must not have been like a fun job to actually work there. You don't have a lot to do. It's just a bunch of like nerds doing rocket stuff. So you're just sitting around all day smoking with the chimps.
Hey, they were probably better smoking buddies than half of the people there.
You guys really get me.
I have a new idea for what we would be doing on base as mercenaries in Zaire. Which one of us passes out first from having like a smoke off with the chimps?
I mean, I would just pass out in general from fucking heat stroke. I mean, have you seen my complexion? You really think I belong in the tropics?
Oh, let's combine that with one of those neoprene suits. Good luck.
We put the chimp in one of the latex suits, so it evens it out. So this army, this militia, it is also, like I said, like most of its members are just local children that he's recruited. They'd never actually see battle, and they mostly served as like a weird black uniformed honor guard for whenever OTRAG guests showed up. So they were like, the kids did not have any weapons training, but they did do like a shitload of drill all the time, like every morning.
I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Rodriguez's movie El Mariachi. It was his first movie, and it was like a self-funded thing. It's actually a really funny movie, but he didn't have much budget, so he just shot a lot of the stuff with extras in this town in Mexico where he filmed it. And by the end of the film, by the climactic shootout, or the big shootout at the end with the villain, who's a white guy who doesn't speak Spanish, and he's just reading cue cards the whole time. It's very funny. There weren't any adults left in the town to be his henchmen, so his henchmen are just like kids and teenagers, because it's just like, they just literally like, well, I can't use people as his henchmen who've already died in this movie, so we've got to just get other people, so they get a bunch of kids. And it's like basically that, but a rocket company as well is in real life, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I just want to like take a second, like a momentary derail, to just like imagine this site. You know, you're a German engineer. You're either an ex-Nazi or you're some like recent grad who got recruited by an ex-Nazi. You are being guarded by children. There's a bunch of like weird mercenaries. There are smoking chimps.
So you have to wear like a vinyl sex suit that's really, really uncomfortable.
And another point, I initially saved this for later, but Kacer's girlfriend Susie, she also just has a zoo with her at all times. So at one point, she gets given a gift of 3 crocodiles, which she immediately names Adolf, Ava, and Heinrich. And she just keeps them. They just dig a little pond just in the middle of Capanitono where everybody's walking around, and they just put the crocodiles in there.
She's German, right? Am I?
Yes.
I mean, because to me, there's nothing more German than being like, oh, I just have to have a pet dangerous animal. Like, I just understood who this person. One time I was flying out we used to work when I was in the army in Honduras for a while, and I was in the Tegucigalpa airport waiting for like a shuttle that was going to take me back to Comayagua, where the base was. And I saw like an old Volkswagen Combi, and so like people naked sunbathing on the roof of it in the long-term parking lot in the Comayagua airport. And I'm like, they gotta be fucking Germans. Like, that's just what a German would go to Honduras and sunbathe naked on the top of their car in the airport. And so to me, it's like, you're like, oh yeah, she's there making decisions, and she also has like a menagerie of dangerous animals, to include crocodiles named after Nazis in a fond and affectionate way, in a pond. Like, that's just like, you might as well just start playing Schlager. Like, she is German.
Yeah. And she's going to get a lot more animals as this story goes on.
Oh, neat.
So it's around this period that they actually got their biggest guest in the lead up to their 3rd test launch. While the rocket was being set up on the pad, Mobutu showed up unannounced with his entire court and a crowd of journalists. At first, this seemed like a good thing. Kacer was always after good PR to offset the whole Nazi colonialism thing. And getting his rocket on international news would be a good way to show people OTRAG's progress. But it's also a double-edged sword, because within seconds of taking off, the rocket veered more than 90 degrees and plummeted into the jungle.
Yeah, looking at that, he basically created the first VLS Tomahawk. That thing is going for a target. It just doesn't know what. It just
went. The 3rd test of the rocket crashes, and I want to give this some setup, because otherwise it might sound like a complete non sequitur. This one failure completely convinces Mobutu Sese Seko that OTRAG's gotta go, like be out of the country immediately. Between the embarrassment of the rocket crash, needing to get help from France and Belgium to retake Kolwezi, and the growing international pressure against OTRAG, Mobutu basically realizes that it's in his best interest to get rid of them. But he actually hesitates. He's already sunk a load of resources and money into this, and still thinks it can work out. So he sets them a deadline. If they can't reach orbit within a year, they're gone. But crucially, he does not tell anyone at OTRAG about this. He doesn't tell them about the sword of Damocles they're all working under.
Nice.
Yeah, and for Kacer and OTRAG, the test was just another failure on the road to building a successful rocket. Like, test rockets explode more often than not. It's normal. But this is also the hazard of working with a dictator. If you embarrass them, you're gone. So with all of that, when the boot dropped a year later, it seemed to come out of nowhere. In April 1979, while Kacer was at a conference in Belgium talking about how well OTRAG was doing, he was asked by a journalist if he was aware that Mobutu had shut down Shaba North the day before.
I'd hate to be him.
Your business gets shut down while you're out of town.
I have been thinking this entire time and I'm sorry to cycle back to it, but it's just like the idea of being like the dropout scientist that ends up as like, hey, buddy, you want to come work for me in OTRAG in Zaire? Or like one of those like mercenary goons, the few that he actually was able to pull in. It's just like, imagine living that life and just like all the steps that led up to that point. It's just like, what a ride, man. It's just,
and you're gone from there.
It's just loony. Yeah.
I do think it's appropriate with the dictator stuff that is how it ends, where like there is no rising tension or anything. It's just one day the dictator gave you a deadline he gave you an ultimatum of 1 year, but he forgot to tell you about it. So one day you're just gone.
Some dudes just roll up to your compound and tell you, get out.
The last time a guy in Belgium had his plans in the Congo stymied this quickly, his name was Leopold II.
And quick but obligatory, rest in piss, Leopold.
Yeah. He, it's just when you manage to piss off so many people with being so inhumane that in like the late 19th century in Europe, they're like, no, this guy is fucking around too much in Africa. We got to stop him. Like,
you have
obviously you've crossed some lines there. Yeah.
And while you might kind of expect a rogue genius engineer type to flip out, Kaser seemed to accept the eviction and just move on. He immediately flew back to Capanitono and told the workers they'd strip the entire site to make sure the military didn't steal anything. Also, because he was a paranoid egomaniac, he decided that everything from the Battle of Kolwezi to his own test failures was actually an international plot against him personally.
Oh, we're in the cocaine paranoia. I like it.
Yeah. When the British Aviation Authority uncertified his ancient transport planes because Kaser refused to have them serviced, this also became part of the conspiracy. So, like, the British Aviation Authority comes to him and it's just like, yeah, we noticed that your 50-year-old planes haven't been tested in, like, 12 years. And he's fully just like, Moscow sent you.
I will get revenge for Dresden. Wait, Dresden was, fucking who cares? I'm just going to bomb Coventry again. It's going to happen.
The amount of references to Coventry just makes me think, instead of history being a circle, it's just a binary state.
Coventry is either bombed or not bombed. We're in a long resting cycle right now. It's overdue for that fucking switch to flip from 0 to 1.
Oh, God.
And I know in the last episode I said my new favorite space fact was the size of land that OTRAG rented, but I'd like you to know that I have a new favorite space fact. As the scientists and engineers were packing up the launch site and getting ready to move wherever Kaser could find for them, a group decided to do what they'd wanted to do ever since they got to Capanitono. They were going to kayak the Lavua River. So, like, they'd been on top of this plateau the whole time, and they looked down, and there's this beautiful river right there. And this is a bad idea, because the river is very dangerous. It's got a lot of rapids, and it's infested by crocodiles. Of the 7 engineers who went out, 6 were found half-eaten by crocodiles, and the 7th was never seen again.
We've come full circle. We have Nazi-eating crocodiles.
Yeah.
I wonder
Crocodilus niloticus antifascisticus.
I wonder if they're related to what's-her-face's crocodiles. This is for my brother.
Yeah, exactly. Susie, didn't realize she was creating a blood debt among
a blood feud with crocodiles.
Yeah, the crocodiles of Katanga province, and so they had to revenge their family's bespoiled honor by eating some Nazi rockets. Or just Germans, just random Germans. But once again, hey, I'm in the middle of fucking nowhere in an absolute war zone where a separatist group is across the border trying to kill my ass on a regular basis. I'm gonna get in a kayak and go down this fucking river that, like, Henry, was it like fucking Livingstone himself, fucking like all of the explorers of the Congo were like, yeah, probably not a good idea. There's definitely some big crocodiles. They love eating people. And the Germans like, yeah, no, that is not very rational to assume that these animals do not want to eat us. Like, come on, man. No. That to me, like, I remember reading a story about some people that were like went off track on a fucking Sahara tour, and like it was a German couple and their 6-month-old baby, and like they literally like tried to cut themselves to like feed blood to the baby so the baby could get some liquids, but they all died and they found the fucking skeletons. And once again, nothing more German than I'm going to take a 6-month-old like off track in the Sahara, or I'm going to do a kayaking trip on like when you translate it from fucking Kiswahili, it becomes like the river you die in. Like.
Very much what it says on the tin, while they're too ignorant to even read the basic facts.
Nazi eating crocodile river. And just like it to their credit, The French mercenaries were tried to talk them out of it and said, no, that's a very bad idea.
Just guys.
The Germans just went ahead with it anyway.
I feel like the guy who can like chain smokes more Gauloises than the monkeys around the compound is telling you this is a bad idea. You may want to listen.
This is how you say shit idea.
Vraiment, il faut savoir que les crocodiles veulent bien manger les nazis.
And all of these German scientists are just like, they're just full of the best sausage you can get flown in.
Exactly.
They're nice, they're tasty, they're round.
Yeah, they run out of fucking sunscreens. They just cover themselves in sweet mustard because it'll help, reduce the UV burn.
Just empty Jaeger bottles lining the bottom of the raft.
Their uniforms are like a sous vide. They're just baking.
They're stewing. They touch the water and it's just an instant blood rage for every crocodile in a 3-mile radius.
Yeah, I'm just imagining Joseph Conrad being like, yeah, like it is, implacable and inscrutable horror, but also like it's kind of good sometimes because these dudes got eaten. I have to revise my thesis about Heart of Darkness.
And I want to put this in context because remember that the German OTRAG staff was 40 people, so almost a quarter of their engineering team got eaten.
Yes!
That's a horrendous attrition rate.
Like, we were talking before about the kind of guys that get recruited, but like, imagine when that news gets out, being the person who puts in your CV for OTRAG. I'm just like, oh boy, 7 openings.
Yeah, I mean, like, but I don't know if OTRAG has a body count when like Wikipedia conflicts, when they have like the, emu war in Australia in the 30s and it's like, the winners were the emus or whatever. Like when you can just like have like casualties like, 12 KIA from the fucking, the Revolutionary Army across the border, 13 KIA eaten by crocodiles. Like that is a very funny stat to tabulate.
All right, that's thank you for that idea. We are going to have to make the Battle of Lavua River meme, just like 13 KIA, no casualties on the crocodile side, except for Adolf, Ava, and Heinrich captured.
I just remember there's this place on the island of Hawaii called Kahana Beach that, according to my friend, it translates from Hawaiian to Hell Beach because the beaches were named in the Hawaiian language based on like how easy or difficult they were to land canoes on them. It's incredibly rough because it's like the first thing the Pacific touches after like 3,000 miles of ocean, and it's such rough surf. Like it's a very bad idea to try to go swimming there. And me and my friend were hanging out and watch the German family come down in the dam. He's very out of shape. Just go right out in the water in his fucking Speedo. And like, to his credit, he did make it back, but he did not look fucking good for the wear after getting back.
What is the accepted casualty rate on a German
vacation
tour? Like if it's just 30% casualty rate per German safari is just like, oh yeah,
listen,
that's the
if
number.
I'm not mistaken, the German is made to min-max having fun, and if some casualties happen, they were weak. Whatever.
But what is it about the build of the German that their allure to the grim and hazardous is just ever present?
It's just very funny because you can imagine that guy being like, but I practiced so many levels on German drowning simulator software before I came out here.
I come home from the drowning factory and I play drowning simulator.
Exactly.
This was not in the drowning simulator.
I have to write a letter of complaint to the programmer. This is not accurate.
There's just a Steam review note that cuts out halfway between a sentence.
No, it's posthumous.
Oh my god! I just remember because
he would have wanted me to send this 1 out of 5.
My friend worked as an organic farmer in Hawaii, and I'll think of all the connotations that implies. And so, having reviewed some of his farming work, we're sitting there not really in a state to go fucking swimming. And I remember looking at him and be like, "Are we gonna have to go help these guys? This is bad." He's like, "I don't know, dude. This is really bad." It's just like, and it's just like being trapped in brain prison, just watching this. Be like, is this fat 60-year-old German dude gonna drown?
And those are the kind of waves that will pick you up and just flat out suplex you onto
smash
the floor.
you against a rock.
No, I was a competitive swimmer in high school. I'm very, very comfortable in the water. I've never been more terrified in the water than swimming on the east coast of the island of Hawaii. It is unreal. I mean, totally not related to this. If anything, we are as far from an ocean as you can get on the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
But like, fuck's sake, man. So once again, to round out the point, Germans simply love to do things that will kill you and be like, I'm very surprised that I died.
I was imagining, like it's like the call of the void when you stand next to a very high ledge.
The Germanic void.
Yeah, it's just like the call of the crocodile's jaws. You're just seeing it sitting there in that kind of like mouth open kind of thing and just wondering like, I bet I could fit in there.
Yeah.
This crocodile is friendly.
A quarter of OTRAG's design and engineering team gets eaten. And later on, they're back up to 40 or 50 people. So there were people who heard about this incident and were then just like, cool, job openings.
Yeah. Well, it's like apparently they need new engineers and draftsmen. There's a crocodile-sized deficit in their manning roster, and it's like I said, the bottom 10% of like the Stuttgart College of Engineering are just like, cool. I always wanted to travel.
Send them in.
Also, fun fact, Kacer was meant to be on that kayak trip, and the only reason he wasn't was because he had an emergency meeting with Muammar Gaddafi to secure a new launch site. So Muammar, like, and by emergency, I mean he is about to go on this trip, and he gets the phone call that saves his life.
I know Gaddafi is ultimately one of the, if not the biggest chaos agent on the planet Earth, but he really cocked it up right there.
No, I think the best thing would have been if Gaddafi had been like, let me make it up to you. We'll do a kayak trip on the Blue Nile, and then also brought in crocodiles to make it more authentic.
Yeah. Oh, he sets up their launch site. It's full of crocodiles. It's like, it's so your people will feel at home.
Yes, I'm aware the Blue Nile is in fucking Sudan, but still, it's very funny to imagine.
Oh no, the mental image is 100% there.
All right, here's the deal. You set up a launch site. I invade Chad so I can find some rivers to set you up on.
Yeah.
Do you think Gaddafi had a crocodile guy?
What, like a Bond style feeding someone to a crocodile?
No,
just
like,
someone who has a crocodile.
Like a pub for crocodiles. Just, hey, I need 2 alligators stat.
I'm sure that whoever Gaddafi's court fixers had someone in their Rolodex for crocodiles. Like,
yeah,
whether
just
it was
the exotic animal guy.
Whether it was for feeding people to them or just like light crocodile related entertainment, like they had a crocodile guy.
Yeah, just guy opens trench coat and there's like several different subspecies hanging there by their tails.
I love it.
Like, I got a caiman.
At a certain point, with that much money and power and like diplomatic immunity, you can basically do whatever you want. And like, if Muammar Gaddafi's kink was something involving like I love being surrounded by crocodiles, that's probably the lesser problematic things he could be into.
I have 2 bodyguard units. One of them is the Amazons. The other is a bunch of crocodiles that the Amazons have trained.
OTRAG in Libya.
So for Muammar Gaddafi, getting OTRAG to come to Libya was basically a no-brainer. Like a lot of dictators, he understood shows of power and wealth, and he also understood that having a private space program, like what that would do for his stature. He also didn't have to worry about bad press the way Mobutu had. He was already a global pariah, and working with weird ex-Nazis wasn't going to lose him any more friends.
I know that we had mentioned that Gaddafi is the agent of chaos, but I like the optic of he literally just would have witnessed the failure to launch, trademark.
There it is.
In Zaire, and was like, man, these guys got something going on. I need them.
Like, the 2 test flights up to that point had been successful. Mobutu kicks them out on their first and only failure. Maybe Gaddafi was actually kind of clued in to just like, oh yeah, like that's understandable. But it's also, I think, like he was originally in the running to get OTRAG, but he lost out to Zaire because Zaire's, much further south, closer to the equator.
But also, I think that Gaddafi, while an international pariah and chaos agent, like you said, was also somewhat mid-tier in terms of like Cold War pariah state villains. And if it was Kim Il-sung, they wouldn't have to recruit or attract the team. They would just find a way to abduct them. Like, yeah. So in this case, like he like, I don't know if the Libyans are really good at abducting Libyan citizens from their embassies around the world, but they were not really good at, I think, abducting a Nazi, also a German citizen.
Just subcontract that shit out. It's okay.
You are walking around, like the streets of Berlin or something. You are knocked on the head. You are bundled into a bag that looks like a crocodile. You are thrown into the back of an ancient, like 70-year-old plane that is actively falling apart with a bunch of other, like wriggling crocodile bags because OTRAG has a license to fly these crocodiles around. Oh, and Adolf Heinrich and Ava go with them to Libya.
There you have it. I mean, like, that's why Gaddafi is your man, because clearly when he has absolute control over everything, the pet passporting license requirements are waived when you want to bring your Hitler-themed crocodiles from the Zaire, what will eventually be the DRC, to Libya. So I can't imagine they would. I don't think Kim Il-sung would have let them bring the crocodiles. Like, he just had a guy that's like, no, we've abducted a guy from Japan and we've made him into a crocodile.
We'll dress some people up in crocodiles.
Chuche is all about self-sufficiency. We will just make our own crocodiles. We do not need to import.
Yes, genetically engineered crocodiles. Add that to the conspiracy theory list.
This is our North Korean knockoff crocodile. It's just like an iguana with some extra shit taped on it.
We just got a guy and we've dyed his skin green and filed his teeth down. And it's just like, there you have it, crocodile.
So the crocodile stuff and Susie's kind of like traveling zoo becomes more relevant because the one problem that starts off, like both like Gaddafi and Kaysar both have what the other want. They just don't like each other. For example, in one meeting, while Kaysar was going over some of like the technical details about the launch site, in a truly relatable move, and I hate that I'm saying this about Muammar Gaddafi, he just sat on a spinning chair and just spun around for like 15 minutes nonstop and just made himself dizzy.
What the fuck?
You know, it's just one of those things where you're like, cool, man. It must have sucked to be like the guy from Muammar Gaddafi's, military school class who didn't take over Libya, and just be like, God damn it.
This is what I lost to.
Like, I could have been running this country, but instead the guy who basically gives himself vertigo by spinning a chair around he's in charge of everything. Like he could have my entire family killed.
Muammar Gaddafi is sitting on his spinning chair, and he's got like north, south, east, west things set up around him. He spins around a few times, and wherever he stops is his next invasion target. And it's like, oh, sweet, Chad, south,
north, the middle of the ocean, build an undersea palace, like whatever. I can do whatever I want.
So Lutz Kaysar and Muammar Gaddafi, they do not get along. The only person who could get through to him was Susie, because they were both horse fanatics, and they spent the entire time just talking about horses.
Of fucking course, Gaddafi's into.
Oh yeah, Gaddafi was famous for his like love of horses. And yeah, like in between all of this like
why does he have to be such a deeply weird individual? Just all the way across the board.
It's just what being a dictator do. I don't know.
He does seem to have genuinely liked Susie a lot, to the point like Susie becomes part of his romantic circle.
There it is.
That he has going on. And Lutz, to his credit, is just okay with this because he says like, well, yeah, I'm working all the time. I don't have enough time for that. May like go have fun with the dictator.
Well, next thing you're going to tell me is Condoleezza Rice is somehow involved. I'm waiting for it.
Using his girlfriend as the go-between, Lutz was able to negotiate a new contract for OTRAG. They'd build a missile base in the desert near Tawiwa, near the city of Sabha, and in exchange, OTRAG's construction... So, like, OTRAG had a subsidiary construction company called Sturing, and that construction company, Sturing, would build a military base for the Libyan army in Kufra, near the Egyptian border. So it was a very weird kind of, like, trade going on between them. So they've got a new launch site and a powerful new patron willing to bend the rules to let them do whatever they want, but there are a couple of problems here. First, Kufra is truly in the middle of nowhere. It's in the kind of like southeast corner of Libya, like just in the desert. So yeah, middle of nowhere. There's next to no infrastructure for shipping anything down there. And the other problem is that Sturing does not have nearly enough money to build a military base. Like the way the deal worked out was Libya wasn't going to pay them for it either. The deal was that OTRAG would get a rocket site built to Gaddafi's standards by the Libyan army, and Libya would get a military base built to Kaysar's standards by Sturing. So they both kind of like, they both cheap out and fuck each other over with this.
The mutual dicking, it's bound to happen.
So Kaysar's solution was simple. He found a bunch of old prefab buildings sitting in the US that had been built for the Shah of Iran but were never delivered because of the revolution. So Sturing simply picked these things up out of a field, shipped them to Kufra, and plopped them down into the desert. And that was it. This understandably pissed off the Libyan army, and the Tawiwa launch site suddenly started running into red tape and delays. Even though Gaddafi was enthusiastic about OTRAG, the same cannot be said for the head of Libya's rocket forces, General Ahmed Mahmoud Azwai, who was not thrilled about this pseudo-civilian project and working with Kaysar. Through the red tape, he'd basically become Kaysar's Libyan rival. Bit of a fun side note, General Azwai stayed on as head of Libya's rocket program until 2011 and is currently living in Surrey in the UK.
I mean, listen, here's the thing I'm going to say about if the UK knows anything well, it's somehow managing to get Libyans into the country where there might be some scrutiny that needs to be applied. And if you don't believe me, I'm just going to say, I say call this conspiracy theory, but the guy who did the Manchester bombing at the Ariana Grande concert in 2017 that killed a bunch of people, mostly kids, was someone that was basically he's a British national or had lived in Britain and like as a permanent resident and went to Libya and was brought there to fight against Gaddafi, and there was the cops in Britain had like escorted him to the airport at one point, so like he was known to British security services, and then was like, oh, he's back in Britain, oh, he did a nail bomb and killed a bunch of people. Like there's this weird fucking, well, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but just because it's also, some of it can be incompetence too, but the British security services really love being like, whoops, this guy that we fucking absolutely know and have literally like handheld places went and did this atrocity in Britain or elsewhere, and it's just like,
we couldn't have possibly known about this.
Yeah, and also like it's very funny too, because there's the thing to get residency in the UK, like one of the things you have to declare is whether or not you've worked for a government that commits human rights abuses, but I guess they don't investigate it very much, so it's like whatever.
No one actually expects you to check yes on that, so if they do, they just get confused and like,
you're like, well, he's honest. All right, good chap. He has £2 million that he's paid for the visa fee, despite it costing a lot less than that. All right, whatever.
A crisp £2,000. He's good.
So despite all of these difficulties, OTRAG was able to get the Tawiwa launch site up and running to the point where they could begin regular test flights in 1981, 2 years after being evicted from Zaire. And just like at Kapani Tono, on the launch day for the Kaiser 1, which is what he's now calling his rocket, it's a full-on spectacle. There's international news there, government representatives, and a load of Libyan military officers. Those last ones actually piss Lutz Kaiser off more than anything, because in front of the news, he's trying to present OTRAG as this purely civilian project, and having his new bosses show up in military uniform risks all of that. In the end, the test goes well, with the rocket breaking up after 10 seconds, which is a success to them. However, this was basically the last big success OTRAG would ever have. See, moving to Libya has not solved OTRAG's PR problems. In fact, it's actually made them worse. Like in Zaire, neighboring countries don't like Gaddafi having these missiles, or the fact that OTRAG's flight path will drop spent boosters on their territory. Both Egypt and Israel object and demand that the launch site be shut down. Also, moving to Libya means that OTRAG's director, former Kennedy Space Center director Kurt Debus, and the ardent Nazi that we talked about before, had to quit the company because, as an American citizen, he cannot legally work for Libya. Most of all, moving to Libya severely pisses off OTRAG's board, who just want these are the guys, in everything I've found, they're kind of the silent backers. They don't like to be publicly associated with this stuff. They just want Kaiser to do his job, launch his rockets, and not create so many new scandals. And Kaiser, being Kaiser, responds, quote, "I'm the emperor of rockets. Fuck him."
Okay, God bless.
Yeah.
So they also waived the import duties for cocaine into Libya, is what you're saying.
Yeah, probably. But like these guys, so he says this to the board of the company. Like, despite all of this bravado, things get kind of confusing at this point, because OTRAG, the company, announces that they are beginning the process of pulling out of Libya and will instead switch to launching in Sweden. In practice, on the ground, this changes basically nothing, because any work and testing they do it's all part of the process of leaving. We're going to be leaving, we're setting a timeline to create a plan to leave within 5 years or whatever.
I was also wondering if he said that to the board in German, did he say, "Ich bin der Raketenkaiser"? Because that's a very funny thing to say out loud. I mean, but maybe. Ich bin der Raketenkaiser! I mean, that sounds more natural, doesn't it? Und auch wir fahren nach Schweden. Like, we're also going to go to Sweden. Don't know why, but we're going to.
The move to Sweden, it does eventually happen, but you're getting basically as far from the equator as you can at that point.
Yeah, that was the whole point with with Zaire, was close to Congo, or close to the equator, and then Libya. I mean, not as far from the equator as Sweden, but still pretty far from it. I mean, if I'm correct, the equator in Africa is quite far south of the Sahara Desert, and Libya is mostly north of the Sahara on the Mediterranean. So Libya is not that far removed from doing a rocket launch in Sicily, which could be fun, but probably doesn't put you right on that plane you want to be on.
Not ideal for the
suboptimal.
Now, while the first test launch made OTRAG a lot of enemies, it also caught the interest of a potential new customer, Saddam Hussein. And because this is the period where basically every major power is supporting Iraq in the Iran-Iraq war, Kaiser accurately guessed that working with Saddam would be a way to get OTRAG some good PR. And even the OTRAG board were enthusiastic about this and gave Kaysar the permission to, get whatever deal he could. So he's working with Muammar Gaddafi. That pisses off the world. And world history, the situation is at the point where it's like the way to win your back into the media's good graces is to give weapons to Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, we found there's the yin and yang of Arab nationalist dictators, and we've got the bad one, but we also get the good one. And just to win brownie points, he's also helping to support efforts by this renegade anti-Soviet, anti-communist fighter in Afghanistan who's originally from Saudi Arabia. He's just giving him some financial donations to make sure that the cause is supported. He's checking all the blocks for the 1980s Cold War stuff. Something I'd say is that I've met people who were army officers who had been foreign area officers, like primarily just working out of U.S. embassies and mostly doing arms deal shit for the U.S. military, who in the 80s had been stationed at the U.S. embassy in Baghdad and done that to give weapons to Saddam Hussein. So that was such a thing. I mean, when they found chemical munitions in Iraq after the war and started in 2003, all of those were pre-1991 munitions and precursors that had been given to the U.S. I don't know if they ever found they didn't find anything that was being used to make new stuff, but they did find both precursors and also chemical munition warheads or like artillery rounds with, I think, chlorine gas in them. And they were all pre-1991. They were all
stuff that would have been provided to shoot at Iran.
Right. Stuff that we either sold them, or more likely sold the precursors and manufacturing stuff to so they could make their own. So yeah, that was absolutely a thing at the time. Saddam was our pal. Until he decided he's like, British maps and borders don't apply to me. Kuwait is part of Iraq. Fuck you. And they wound up not liking him after that.
And I'm now imagining if Lutz Kaysar had gotten more into the weapons design, designing a Stinger that is just 200 Stingers all bolted together. The bundle Sam.
Also, having worked with Afghans, I feel like if there was some effect you could achieve by bundling 200 weapons together and firing them all at once, they would have already done that. Absolutely. A country where commanders had to be briefed that if your soldiers say they saw 40 people inside a minivan, they're not exaggerating or making it up. This is in fact likely. They absolutely would have found a way to tie 200 guns together and fire it, to shoot down a transport plane or something.
There has to be footage of that at a wedding of some kind. I've seen too many videos of just AKs just getting racked and let loose into the air.
I'm left to think of the image I saw of the jury-rigged anti-aircraft gun in Ukraine that the Ukrainians built out of a bunch of AKs.
A shitload of them taped together.
It's just a shitload of guns just stuck together on a mount.
I will always remember from the Libyan civil war a photo of a guy basically, or it was either Libya or it was Syria, where a guy was checking the angle of incidence on a mortar tube with an iPad app. Probably a thing just to fucking measure whether something was level or not and what the degree was, but you could see a guy holding an iPad against a mortar tube, and it's just
my favorite is still the actual black powder cannon on the back of a Toyota, just the ultimate technical the technical distilled, if you will.
And I only, and this is a derail, I only really found out
as
about
if we weren't derailed already
while researching this topic. But shortly after these events take place, Muammar Gaddafi tries to annex a good chunk of northern Chad, and his entire modern well-trained military gets turned back by the Toyota army.
The Toyota War, isn't it? Yeah.
Turns out mobility is actually useful in modern warfare. Who would have thought?
Especially if you can mount a Zeus on the back.
I told the story, didn't I, on the last episode about the Toyota's PR having to do a statement about the comments about why are so many of the Taliban in 2001 driving Toyota pickup trucks?
And
they basically said mobility and reliability are two very important things, whether or not you're an international terrorist group. And it's just well done, guys.
With what I'm about to tell you, I want to clarify something right off the bat, is that I have not been able to verify these claims, and most of these come from the Kaysars themselves. So you may want to take this with a grain of salt. I'm going to give their explanation and other explanations. I'm not certain which one is the truth. But the way Lutz tells it, Saddam, whenever they met, was very upfront with him. He said he didn't give a shit about satellites, and he asked Kaysar if he could fire a nuke into Tehran. According to himself, Kaysar was so disgusted at the idea of making weapons that he turned down the offer then and there.
That's a blatant lie.
The other explanations for why OTRAG didn't work with Iraq are a little bit more believable. First off, Saddam wasn't actually offering them a contract. If Kaiser decided to work with him, he would be a government employee and totally beholden to Saddam, which is very against Kaiser's style. The second is that OTRAG was worried about the Mossad, which had a habit of targeting nuclear and rocket scientists working for their adversaries. A lot of OTRAG's ex-Nazi staff actually had previous run-ins with this because the Mossad had run a successful assassination and intimidation operation against Nasser's UAR rocket program, which we will definitely be talking about sometime in the future. Regardless of the actual reason, any negotiations became moot in late 1981 when Israel bombed the Osirak nuclear reactor in Iraq. That just instantly makes up Kaiser's mind of like, oh, if we go to work with them, we're going to get bombed.
Yeah, and Mossad will probably kill you too. If I'm not mistaken, that's kind of how it went down with the was the Canadian guy who tried to build the super gun or whatever.
Yeah, Gerald Bull. I
don't know if that's if that's Mossad or if it was somebody else, but like
they don't admit
probably
to it,
them. But he also had enemies in like this place. Or that's the thing with these kind of figures is they make so many enemies.
Also, you kind of want to like not. I mean, I feel as though if you when you think about Lutz Kaiser, the degree to which you're probably on thin ice with the Israeli security services already for a couple of other reasons, you may not want to get on their shit list even more.
Yeah, better to just stay off their radar as much as possible, which OTRAG, like, when this happens, when this nuclear reactor gets bombed by Israeli jets, and like previously, a year before, it had been bombed by Iranian jets. So this was a target on a lot of people's radar. As soon as this happens, the Tawiwa site becomes like an armed military base because Gaddafi is worried that his rocket site is going to get bombed. So suddenly, like, SAM missiles start going up everywhere.
The downfall of the Rocket Emperor.
And then the entire house of cards for OTRAG comes crumbling down, all at once, very quickly. In 1981, the same year of their first successful test flight at Tawiwa, while most of OTRAG's staff were back in Europe on holidays, the Libyan army seized control of the Tawiwa launch site. There was no explanation given, and when the Kaisers complained to Gaddafi, he claimed to know nothing about it, and that he would start an investigation and get to the bottom of this matter. So most likely, it was a move by General Azwai, who didn't like working with OTRAG, and had before tried to put them under army control. And it's kind of the same thing as with Zaire, where there is no lead-up action, there is no kind of cause and effect. It's just out of nowhere, the dictator finally decides he doesn't want to work with you anymore. And this is really the end of OTRAG as a cohesive company. Some of their staff quit, some agreed to work with Libya because Gaddafi was offering 3 times their wages, and the company was shut down in 1987, though they did manage to get 1 test flight off in Sweden. The Libyan army would salvage enough OTRAG equipment to fire off 13 of their own rocket tests, though without Kaiser's notes, they weren't really able to make headway on anything, and the program was shut down 2 years later. Meanwhile, the Kaisers actually stayed in Libya, living out of a small hotel in Tripoli. Because Gaddafi had told him that there'd be an investigation and the seizure of the rocket site would be reversed in court, Lutz basically hung around for a few years, trusting that Gaddafi was totally working to get his stuff back. While living there, they also became friends with Yasser Arafat, because the Palestinian ambassador to Libya was also living in the same shitty hotel, and Arafat visited him frequently.
Part of me was be like, but this man probably smoked more shisha than any human being has any right to in an entire lifetime. But also you think like, this guy's a dickhead, probably, he deserves to have the Libyan hotel where the AC doesn't function, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, it's described in the book that like Susie is counting cockroaches the whole time she's there. So she's just like rebuilding her own zoo again, just with like whatever bugs happen to come inside.
Oh, yes, so she can shoot it again.
So eventually the Kaisers realized they weren't going to get their money or rockets back and settled in the United States. They got married in 1991 before deciding they didn't like the US. They used the last of their money to buy a small island in the Marshall Islands where they lived until Lutz Kaiser died in 2017 at the age of 78. And yes, they did live on this island as basically nudists with a bunch of original Hitler paintings on all the walls.
I mean, look, I'm not trying to just reach for the absolute fucking, Z tier jokes about Germans, Nazis, etc. But I feel as though if you collect original Hitler paintings and you name your crocodiles after Hitler, Hitler's wife, and Heinrich Himmler, that does kind of make me think you are, in fact, very much a Nazi. And like I said, living out the rest of your life as nudists in the Marshall Islands tracks so well with just like the German experience, the Nazi shit notwithstanding, that like I actually feel a lot more confident in my previous predictions and some of my jokes. I'm less concerned about offending, you know, my gentle and friendly German fans and friends. I think they know this type of guy very, and the fact that he's from Baden-Württemberg like probably doesn't surprise them in the grand scheme of things. It's just a type of guy.
And because that's not the most kind of explosive ending to a series, I figured I'd leave everyone with a good taste in their mouth by talking more about the OTRAG Zoo. So we previously talked about the crocodiles and how basically everywhere she would go, Susie would bring her traveling entourage with her. A lot of this was because, like with the uniforms, she wanted to liven the places up a little bit and found that both Kapani Tono and Toiwa were very kind of drab otherwise. At Toiwa, she actually had Cleo the camel, Amadeus the goat, an entire flock of peacocks, and 3 horses, Riem, Habibi, and Bucephalus, one of which was a gift from Gaddafi. She also had this thing where anytime one of the animals pissed her off, she would just have a Libyan soldier shoot it.
Oh.
So Cleo the camel bit Susie, so she organized a firing squad to kill this camel.
Wait.
Just lined it up in front, got the camel standing someplace, shanghaied a bunch of Libyan soldiers nearby and just like kill it.
It's like the plot of Stand By Me, the movie. It's like, instead of, hey, you want to see a dead body, so hey, you guys want to shoot a camel? And they're like, fuck yeah, I want to shoot a camel. Those pieces of shit always spitting on me, man. Fucking not nice creatures.
But yeah, that is the story of OTRAG, the world's first public launch company, the weirdo Nazis and dictators that they worked with, and a collection of Nazi and anti-Nazi crocodiles. So, how do you guys all feel?
I wish that there was more literature on the anti-fascist crocodile.
Are you kidding? I wish there was more literature on that fucking Rapids trip.
I was going to say, yeah, like I feel as though these are the only people who watched whatever the Werner Herzog documentary is about the jungle or whatever, where they could only shoot during the golden hour, and so they had to spend like all this time in the jungle just waiting. And there's like the behind the scenes footage of him just sitting around and be like, the jungle devours you in this massive fornication, like. And they were like, that sounds great to me, actually. I think I want to see what he's talking about. Like,
they're just sitting there like, sign me the fuck up.
I will hold to this position that of all the things you've just like, this is, you know, grotesque, weird, egomania, money, shitty thing, everything, the like infinity power that dictators have, that billionaires are kind of similar. In some ways, it's not quite as fully beyond the pale, like nothing can stop them, but might as well be in most cases. But the crocodiles eating the engineers because they were so goddamn German they had to go on a fucking kayaking trip on the river you should never kayak on, that to me is just, it's icing on the cake. It's perfect. Like, yep. That really is very, very good.
Whenever I first heard about that, it was a like a side note offhandedly mentioned in a weird translated account that I found. And I didn't put it in at first because I didn't think I could trust it. And it was only whenever I found the actual book that came out like a month ago that actually talked about this that it suddenly became like, oh shit, that's a quarter of their workforce. Like,
I don't necessarily know if it's a good movie. It's probably his best movie in my opinion. But have you ever seen the Wes Anderson film, The Life Aquatic?
Yes.
So the scene where Jeff Goldblum, who has his like army of twink boat hands, and like he says he's gonna go and like help liberate Steve Zissou, and then literally a smash cut to him like burying the last of them. There's like 12 identical crosses on the beach. Like that to me is all I can think of, is like the German engineers being like, oh, it was a great idea for but it's going to be a very cool kayak trip, and then like smash cut to just like a very, very sated and sleepy crocodile.
Yep. And then, back up to the top of the plateau where like a line of French mercenaries and chimps are just like smoking.
Chain smoking gilet cigarettes or whatever.
The junior most OTRAG employee has a Dremel tool and is just crossing out their names on the fucking, all of the like the names of people that are working in this company at like the monument they've built to themselves for their great success beforehand.
Building the in memoriam memorial for your company, except it's like 90% empty space. It's like, oh, well, we'll use it eventually.
Imagine being their coworkers. It's just like attrition is a thing that happens at every company. Every job is going to have people that's going to leave. But it's like 25% of your company is gone because they were eaten.
Yeah, I mean, there's the company that lost almost all its employees because it was Cantor Fitzgerald. Their office was like where the first plane in 9/11 hit. And it's like, that's a really fucked up story because like, yeah, that literally, like, it was a huge number of them. That's a thing they couldn't have predicted in any way. Whereas,
but then you have this.
Whereas in this case, it's like losing that much of your workforce because they decided to do something that I feel like if even the French mercenaries, you know, who had the genius idea of, I'm going to go MIA or fucking, I'm going to, what's the right word? Desert from the French Foreign Legion and just hang around, Lumumbashi, you know, see if I can find some work. Those guys probably not the best judgment in the world. And they're like, this is a bad idea, guys. You don't want to do that. Like, that to me is a mass casualty company attrition tragedy that's actually very funny.
Yeah, to me, just the fact that like people signed up for this, like the 7 people, it would be like if I went on my computer and I looked at my Teams chat for work and there was just like all these different things, and then there was just Crocodile River Kayak.
Yeah, it's weird. There's not really been a lot of activity in the Slack channel for the Crocodile River Kayak trip. Do you think they're okay, or they just not have signal right now?
Oh, but yeah, that is the OTRAG series. Nate, thank you for coming on.
You're very welcome.
For both of these, I know that whenever we initially pitched it to you, it was just one, and then content spiraled out. I needed to get the Nazi crocodiles in there.
I mean, look, it's long because I take every opportunity to derail it and tell a story or make a joke, but I appreciate you guys being good sports about it, and this is very fun and very interesting.
I mean, to be fair, the derailing is kind of like the light of my life. So,
yeah,
look,
same.
You know, Quinn shares a name with Riley, whose surname is Quinn, and all I ever live to do is distract Riley and interrupt him and take the discussion in a different direction. So it's like a Pavlovian response for me.
Just translates perfectly.
And you're also Canadian. That's the thing too. It's just like, no, like a Canadian with Quinn in their name. I must interrupt them and change the subject.
A Canadian attempts to wrangle cats.
Do not worry. I have my special interest. Bring them up and I will just start.
Can you guys, I don't want to interrupt things from the episode, but I want to send this to you because this showed up on my timeline and it seemed appropriate. So for those of you who aren't going to click on the link and where it's an audio medium and I'm describing a video, it's basically a TikTok and a TikTok reaction juxtaposed next to one another, where a guy is basically crying and says, my baby brother got eaten by a lion on a trip to Africa last year. And then an old guy laughing and then making lion noises down a long cardboard tube and then making crying baby noises afterwards. And it's just...
God.
Baby brother, maybe not a German, but spiritually German.
Yeah. But yeah, is there anything that you want to plug?
Oh yeah, so I am the co-host of 3 shows. Trash Future, a podcast about the tech industry and the stupidity of it, basically explained by reading what the tech industry writes about itself. Also British politics, because we all live in Britain. I am the co-host of What a Hell of a Way to Die, a show about why you shouldn't join the military, but also recently a show about being a dad and gardening and housework. And because we're dudes who've been out of the military a really long time, and Francis is 40 and I'm almost 40. So at a certain point, it's like, let's not rehash the same shit. Let's just fucking talk what's going on in our lives. Like me making stuff with rudimentary electrical engineering skills, apparently. I also the co-host of Lines by Donkeys, a podcast about military disasters, hosted by Joe Kasabian. But I am now officially one of the co-hosts, and it's a great show. We're about to put out a series that we've recorded in advance. It's I believe 5-parter on the history of the Battle of Stalingrad. And really interesting, really harrowing at times, really funny at other times too. So hopefully you enjoyed that. It'll be released for free. But also if you sign up on the Patreon, you can get like series basically in advance. You get all the installments at once. And then I am the producer of Kill James Bond. I'm not a co-host. It is a podcast about the Bond franchise, but then also just movies in general, mostly franchise of things like the Bourne movies, the Mission Impossible movies, all the Man from U.N.C.L.E. movies, the Rambo movies, basically. But it's hosted by 3 extremely funny trans people, and it talks a lot about masculinity and movie portrayals of things like they have a rating system for how much it's a scum system, it's a science-based system. I can't remember everything because it's a SMARM, cultural insensitivity,
unprovoked violence,
and misogyny. And yeah, it's Rambo. I believe Rambo 4 was the worst movie they'd ever seen. So any of those shows, any of those episodes, any of that sounds interesting to you, please check them out. They're all available on SoundCloud or Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, things along those lines. And they all have Patreon. So if you like them a lot, you can sign up for bonus content. Thank you for entertaining me and my digressions. This has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and the vibes in your slideshow are just incredible. Like, I love that old expired 70s film. Fucking, like I said, you're about to get killed by the Baader Meinhof vibes. It's just something about it's impossibly cool.
Oh yeah, and we will have listeners, whenever we're severely backlogged on it, we do have plans to get videos out a lot faster, and we will have those fun pictures in it though. But yeah, Nate, thank you for coming on.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to Failure to Launch. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review or tell a friend. Everything helps. If you want to follow us, contact us, or suggest a topic, you can email us at launchfailurepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at launch_failure. Failure to Launch is hosted on Anchor, and we post on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. We also post our episodes with visual aids on YouTube at Failure to Launch. All music was provided by DJ Danarchy.